Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Great. Today we're tackling one of the most, influential books in history.
The Bible.
You got it.
Yeah.
We're going to explore how it came to be, what it teaches, and how it still shapes our world today.
That's a tall order. It's such a vast and complex text.
It is, but that's what makes it so fascinating. I think a good place to start is with the basics. The Bible is divided into two main parts, right?
Yep, the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Right. And they were written at very different times, even in different languages originally.
That's right. The Old Testament, it was originally written in Hebrew, and it spans, centuries. It covers everything from creation, in Genesis, to the laws in Exodus, the poetry of Psalms, even those powerful messages from the prophets.
Wow, that's a lot to cover.
It is. Then you have the New Testament, written mostly in Greek. It really zeroes in on the life and teachings of Jesus and his followers.
And that was written much later, right?
Yeah, mostly in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, so quite a gap between the two.
A significant gap. Okay, so we have these texts written so long ago, but how did they become the Bible? How did they decide what was in and what was out?
That's where the fascinating process of canonization comes in. Over time, religious leaders and scholars had to determine which texts were, I guess you could say, divinely inspired, and, which ones were worthy of being included in the Bible.
So it wasn't just a random collection of stories. There were actual criteria they used.
Oh, absolutely. For example, one important factor was apostolic authority.
Meaning it was written by an apostle or someone close to them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They also looked for consistency with the developing teachings of the early church.
It had to fit in with what they already believed.
Right. And of course, it needed widespread acceptance among Christian communities. It had to resonate with people.
That makes sense. It was a process that evolved over time. So we have these two distinct sections, the Old and New Testaments. But are there any, overarching themes that tie it all together?
Definitely. If you take a step back and look at the big picture, you'll see these recurring ideas pop up everywhere. Creation, humanity's flaws, the need for redemption, and the importance of faith, love, and justice. Those themes are woven throughout both the Old and the New Testaments.
That reminds me of the story of Adam and Eve right there at the beginning. Such a classic example of human fallibility and the need for, something greater to help us overcome our mistakes.
Absolutely. That idea of sin and redemption, it becomes even more central in the New Testament, especially with the life and teachings of Jesus.
So Jesus' role in Christianity is directly tied to this idea of redemption, of offering a way out of the, I guess you could say, the mess we often find ourselves in.
Exactly. It's the belief that through Jesus' life, his death and resurrection, we're offered a path to salvation and forgiveness. It's about bridging that gap between humanity and God that was, broken way back in the Garden of Eden.
And speaking of bridging gaps, that brings us to the concept of prophecy. The Old Testament is filled with predictions about a coming Messiah. It's like foreshadowing in a movie. How does that connect to Jesus in the New Testament?
That's a question that's kept theologians and scholars busy for centuries. Many Christians believe that Jesus fulfilled those Old Testament prophecies. They'll even point to specific passages as evidence. But, there are different interpretations out there, as always. The idea of prophecy adds this whole layer of complexity and mystery to the Bible's narrative. And I think that's one of the things that keeps people coming back to these texts, searching for deeper meaning. It's like a puzzle, with pieces spanning thousands of years, different languages, all these human experiences. It really makes you think about its message and how it applies to our lives today.
And speaking of thinking about the message, interpreting the Bible, it isn't always so straightforward, is it? There are all these different approaches to how we understand these ancient texts.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have some people who believe in a literal word-for-word interpretation.
Right.
But then you have others who see all this room for symbolism and metaphor.
That's one of the biggest debates, right? Even today. Is it meant to be taken literally?
Yeah.
Or is there a deeper symbolic meaning in there?
It's a great question. Take the creation story in Genesis. Some people, they view it as a literal scientific account
Of how the world began.
Right. While others see it as more of a poetic expression of God's power and the order of creation.
It's interesting how one story can have such different interpretations. We were talking about different perspectives earlier, and there's this method of studying the Bible. It's called the historical critical method. And it basically says we should look at the text through the lens of history and culture.
It's kind of like putting on a special pair of glasses,
To see the text more clearly.
Exactly. Instead of just reading it at face value, we think about the time period. when it was written. The author's background, their societal influences, even the political climate back then.
So we're trying to understand the world behind the words.
Yeah. And that can really help shed light on passages that might seem confusing or controversial to a modern reader.
Like, we might not understand certain laws or customs from the Old Testament because we don't have that historical context.
Exactly. It's like trying to understand Shakespeare.
Yeah, you need that background information to really get it. One area where biblical interpretation gets especially tricky is when we bump up against science. The creation narrative versus evolution, for example.
That's a debate that's been going on forever. And it really comes down to how individuals reconcile their faith with scientific discoveries. Some people find ways to harmonize the two.
And others stick to a more literal interpretation.
Exactly. And then you have the whole conversation about gender roles and sexuality.
That's a big one.
Definitely. There are so many different interpretations of what the Bible says about gender and sexuality, and they fuel all these debates about LGBTQ plus rights, about the role of women in religious leadership, even family structures.
Those are issues that people feel really strongly about.
For sure, because they impact people's lives and identities. It's understandable that they generate so much passionate discussion.
So the Bible, even though it was written centuries ago, it's incredibly relevant today. I mean, it sparks these conversations, it shapes our thinking, it even influences how we view the world around us. But beyond the controversies and the debates, there's also this impact it has on the lives of, billions of people. People who find guidance and meaning and strength in its pages.
That's a really important point. For many, the Bible is more than just a historical document, right? Or just a collection of stories. It's a source of comfort, inspiration, even moral guidance. It shapes their lives, their relationships, how they navigate the world.
And it goes beyond personal beliefs, too. I mean, the Bible has a huge impact on religious practices, traditions, holidays.
Think about the rituals and practices in both Judaism and Christianity. Many of them are rooted in biblical teachings, from prayers and sacraments to, holidays like Passover and Easter.
It's really amazing to think about how these ancient stories and teachings still shape how we live and worship and celebrate, even in the 21st century.
Yeah.
And the influence of the Bible goes even further, I think. It's even woven into the fabric of popular culture.
Oh, for sure. Movies, music, literature, art. The Bible has inspired so many creative works. You have classic films like The Ten Commandments, or even modern TV series like The Chosen.
They're constantly finding new ways to retell these biblical stories.
And they captivate audiences. They offer new perspectives on these familiar narratives.
It's the power of storytelling. These stories, they resonate with us because they tap into these fundamental human experiences: love, loss, betrayal, redemption, the search for meaning. They're things we can all relate to, no matter what our personal beliefs are.
And that's what's so fascinating about the Bible. It speaks to us on so many levels. It makes us think critically, wrestle with these complexities. And ultimately, it helps us find our own understanding of its message.
So after all this, after this deep dive, what does it all mean? What does the Bible have to say to us today in the 21st century?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think with so many interpretations out there, the meaning of the Bible, it becomes really personal. It's like a mirror, reflecting our own beliefs, our values, our experiences.
And it makes us grapple with these big questions about faith, about morality, about history, our place in the world.
Exactly, and I think that's why it's still so relevant, even for people who aren't religious. It's a text that shaped our culture, our laws, our art, even our language.
It's a part of who we are as a society.
And even if we don't agree with everything it says or how it's been interpreted over the years, I think it deserves our attention and our respect.
Absolutely. It invites us into this conversation, this dialogue that's been going on for thousands of years.
And it's still going on. New generations are reading these texts and they're finding their own meaning in them. You know what's amazing to me? It's that even after all these centuries, the Bible still has this power, to spark debate and inspire so many different takes on it.
It really speaks to its lasting relevance, doesn't it? And the depth of its message. I mean, what other book can you say that about?
I know. And I think part of what makes it so enduring is that it grapples with these really fundamental questions we all face as human beings.
Like what?
Well, like, where did we come from? What's our purpose? How do we make sense of suffering and evil in the world? What happens after we die? The big stuff.
Those are questions that have resonated with people forever, haven't they?
Across cultures throughout history. It's incredible.
It's like the Bible gives us this framework for exploring those huge existential questions, even if it doesn't always give us clear answers. Speaking of not always having clear answers, we talked earlier about the different ways people interpret the Bible.
Right. Some folks take it very literally.
While others see more room for symbolism and metaphor. Do you think one way is more, like, right than the other?
That's a really tough one. I think it comes down to the individual, their own beliefs and perspectives. There's no single right way to read or understand the Bible.
That makes sense.
The important thing is that we approach it with an open mind and a willingness to, engage with all its complexities.
I think that's a great point. It's not really about finding the right answers, but more about engaging in the process of questioning, exploring, wrestling with these ideas. It's the journey of discovery that can be so enriching,
Yeah,
wherever you end up in terms of what you believe.
exactly. And you know what? That's why I think the Bible is still so relevant today, even for folks who don't consider themselves religious. Think about it. It's shaped our culture, our laws, our art, our language. I mean, it's woven into the very fabric of who we are as a society.
It's true. Whether we realize it or not, the Bible has had a profound impact on our world. And even if we don't agree with everything it says or how it's been interpreted over the centuries, it's a book that deserves our attention.
It really does. At the end of the day, it's a book that brings us into this conversation, this dialogue that's been going on for millennia.
And that conversation is still unfolding as new generations come along and they encounter these ancient texts and they find their own meaning within them. Wow, I think we've really gone deep today.
We have.
I mean, we've explored how the Bible came to be, its main teachings, how it's impacted history and culture, even the controversies that surround it. But as we've said throughout the show, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Just the beginning. There's so much more to discover, so much to think about, and yes, so much to debate.
So we want to leave you with this thought as we wrap up. What will your next chapter be in this ongoing story of the Bible? Will you pick it up and read it for yourself? Will you take a deeper dive into a specific part that really caught your attention? Will you discuss it with friends or family?
However you choose to engage with it, we hope this deep dive has made you curious and that it's inspired you to keep exploring the rich and complex world of the Bible.
Thanks so much for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation alive.
And happy reading, everyone.